Hi, this is Kralik and welcome to Gamers Explain. On today's episode, I interviewed a bunch of people, probably like 9, I guess, and asked them all the same question. The question is, in your gaming experience, both as a GM and a player, what's your sense of balance between scenes in the game that are action or combat heavy versus intrigue or dialogue heavy versus investigative or mystery focused? These are their answers. Presenting Remnant. So in the games that you run, what kind of balance do you look for in setting up like action or dialogue or investigation type situations? How do you balance that?
I found unless you go in like for an Agents of Oblivion like setting game, they're gonna go into a mission however long it is, if it's real time or if it's play by post. If it's transport, they're gonna know it's mostly going to be about security and situational awareness. They know they have a MacGuffin that they have to take from point A to point B. If it's a missing person type thing, they kind of, those are a little bit more easy. One of the rapid games I was doing was supposed to be Pulp, and I found out I kind of ran it more noir since it was investigation. So to spin that, just make it more, I guess, Disney movie-ish versus just all about the investigation, more Indiana Jones. I found when you're doing a game, I guess getting feedback from the players besides, yeah, that's good. It's great because then you have a baseline to actually bounce off of. If you're gonna run like a campaign that's more about combat, I mean, just let them know in advance. If there's if you have a group of 5 people and 4 of them are constantly trying to just talk through things with people and they get stuff resolved, or they just think outside the box and they wheel and deal. Just have the, hey, do you still want it to be more about combat, or do you want it to be more about this mercantile thing? You guys want to have a trading company. As I played Hackmaster for, I think the campaign ran 5 years, and I was playing a very different game than everybody else in combat. Even when we started, I knew I was like the weak, like I had my whistle out when we were fighting, in my mouth already, obviously, because did not want to do anything physical and like combat because I would die. That's literally what I said. And everyone's like, "What, are you scared?" And you're like, "Yes, I'm very scared. Hold me." I mean, I'm going to cry, and there's at least 3 drops of pee already, and we haven't even gotten into combat. And they were like, "You're just playing somebody just embraces the fact that like I am not strong and this and the other. Like I'm not playing like a barbarian or a fighter or anybody. I can't even do a pull up." That's why I have a backpack with wheels that I drag.
Yeah.
But in that game, eventually, because of all the sub skills I had and the ways I looked at things differently, like there's no magical weapons. You just have to find the materials and find somebody in the world that can make what you want. So my idea was, well, I'm going to take some money, get a guy, write out a legal contract, put some magic on it. He's literally given like 1,000 gold to go and find people that can do armoring, leather and metal, can make weapons, and have them relocate to the city that we're using operationally for a base, since it's a capital. We'll pay for their living expenses and their family and everything to move out. That's what the 1,000 gold was for. Because that's way easier than trying to figure out and have somebody and say, well, go over here, go over there, go wherever, and then come back to me with instead of all these side quests to get like an upgrade in armor, we'll just like do it on our way between our actual missions. So we save so much time.
Yeah, why not subcontract that out?
Yeah. I mean, the bad thing was the GM was like, all right, roll. I also had the thing where like we fought like 2 owl beasts because you can't use owl BEAR without getting sued because that's a D&D thing. much like orc, how you spell it is trademarked. We fought 2 of those, and everyone almost died. I found there was 8 eggs left behind. They were 2 of them were a pair, and was there. We ended up fighting them because we got too close to the nest. So I opted to go ahead and raise all 8 owl beasts and investing money in the owl beast ranch so I could use them in combat, so I wouldn't have to fight in melee. Created a magical cage to go ahead and transport them from the ranch to the cage, where I would throw them out like a
Pokemon.
gremlin, not gremlin, the whatever Mowgli was before they were a gremlin, when they were cute, little furball.
Mogwai.
Yeah, I would throw out them like little mogwais, and they would roll from little furball to like a Geo Metro or Prius sized monster that would just like be violent and angry. So like we had a situation where like, okay, there's 6 of us, and there's like 13 elite gnolls that are fully armored in this room that they think they're going to catch us in the trap and just shoot us from their murder kill holes with their crossbows. We can open up the door real quick, run in, and attack them. It's like, I got a better idea. Why don't we do this and see what happens? And after they get tired and go to sleep, if they kill everything, I'll put them back in the cage and they'll go home. And I looked at the GM, do we still get experience for all this? And he got mad because it was like supposed to be like a really complicated fight. And what I did was we were like SWAT. Instead of a flashbang, I threw in like 5 owl beasts. And then like I put pythons on the doors, and I was trying to hammer it closed. They're like, what are you doing? It's like, I don't want them coming out. It's like, I thought they're trained. They're trained not to kill me. You guys are totally different. You've never been around them. So he just like was behind the screen. He's like, what are their stats? I handed him note cards because I had 8 of them. So their names were all spelling out omelet. And then he figured that out. He was like, this is just so wrong. So he was killing his own thing that was supposed to murder the group. He was an adversarial GM. It was good. So when we saw the blood coming out from underneath the door and the screams, and they're like, we open the door now? I'm like, no, we wait until they go into siesta after causing so much murder and mayhem. And then I like scooped them back into the cage. I was like, okay, we can take their stuff and go now. They're like, what? And they're like, yeah, their armor might be jacked up, but we can repair that. And their crossbows are just fine. They didn't even get a chance to really use them. Can't really use a crossbow in like, hand-to-hand combat with something as big as a car that's picking you up and eating you. So, yeah.
How do you handle investigation in play-by-post games in particular? Like, it can really drag down over a long period of time where your clues are so far apart. Like your scenes could be 3 weeks apart, right? How do the players expect to remember stuff?
So since I just ran a game, I guess we should backtrack. Actually, I'll put a pin in that over here that you can't see in my digital board for when we talk about when games need to go. I started a clue thread also for investigation. I kind of look at it kind of like in the gumshoe system. Like if you come in, there should be some obvious stuff. You don't have to roll for like, okay, you're at the scene and there's a body and there's a lot of blood on the ground and they're not moving. And supposedly the body was found like 8 hours ago. You just got on scene. There's flies and everything. I'm not gonna let you don't have to roll for the guy to realize the guy's dead. Like how the guy died, you might have to look at the wound. I mean, if he doesn't have a head, it's obviously because he couldn't breathe, because he had no head.
Yeah.
Lack of oxygen.
Yeah.
And a break. But
Toxic.
Yeah, it depends on the system. I mean, sometimes you give them obvious clues, and if they have other stuff, you can try and interject that through like they roll if they want to roll. If not, NPC has told them some stuff now. Since play by post might be kind of long between clues, for the second session, I started doing a clues thread, which is just stuff they found out. and I've told them that they can go ahead and message me or put a post in. I'll make sure that first post has all the stuff in there, people, places, and things that they found. Unless I misspell something, and you're like, okay, well, why does this gray haired lady have black hair? It's supposed to be a veil because her son's dead. I mean, her hair didn't turn back black because her son died, because that'd be a different kind of story. It's not supernatural at all, so that's very weird. Maybe she just dyed it. I don't know. It's the 50s. I don't know if they have hair dye yet. I have to look it up.
Yeah, I used to run this Space Master game, and I was heavily drinking at the time, and I would just get like blasted drunk. And when I got drunk, I would lose memory, right? But I would function normally. I just wouldn't remember it. So I would, I mean, they would have no idea when my memory would cut out. And so things would just get goofy, right? And so the next week we'd go back and it's like, well, you said that that the spaceship was completely on autopilot now, and like we just couldn't control it. It's like, did I? Thinking, I wonder what I was intending to do with that. All right, well, let's just go with it. So the players would kind of
You write that down as like, is that how you remember it? Interesting.
Yeah.
You're like, wait, so how much of this stuff is you being drunk and you don't remember? How much of it is actually stuff you're planning to go ahead and mess with us?
Yeah.
Because it's space. I mean, it could be an anomaly.
Yeah. Well, all kinds of stuff would happen that was just goofy too, that I was sober, or not sober, but at least had a memory for it, or planned even better.
Yeah.
So it all worked out, but I was younger and quicker thinking then, I think, and drunker.
Yeah. This is the nice thing about play by post. Like, if they're like, I'm gonna jump out of the car, you're doing 60 miles an hour. Yeah, I know. I'm going to jump to the other car. Okay. Roll athletics or whatever it is in whatever system. Okay, they failed. I was like, oh, cool. You either know exactly what to do from the get-go there, or I have to think about this.
Yep.
Like, did they bounce off that vehicle and then they're on the hood of another vehicle that's swerving all over the place now because they're freaked out because there's somebody trying to carjack them? Or do they tumble and roll, they stand up in their traffic and everybody's flying past them? They're trying to, oh man, this is... And did they drop any gear? And that's just if it's a normal street versus if like there's hover cars or whatever. You have 3-dimensional roads.
Yeah. The ability to think and take long bathroom breaks in play by post can't be overestimated.
And if your game's random, if something's just totally, they throw you a curveball out of left field and you throw them something back, they're like, this is a shuttlecock. I know. How do you like it? That's kind of weird.
Here's Harrigan.
Yeah. So my first note says totally depends on the game, genre, and players. Yeah. So there you go. And I think it does, right? I do think this is where a good session 0 would help a lot to understand what people are interested in. And if people want to go to that super, like there's a couple of games that we're looking at, the Delta Green game looking at right now. A couple of people were like, I don't know about investigation. So I was like, don't worry. I have an approach for that. If people are familiar with the Gumshoe games, basically, if you need the clue, you find the clue. And if you make a great roll or role play well or approach the scene intelligently, you get more. So you go from the bare minimum to move the plot forward. So you're never stuck in that mode where you didn't find the widget that actually opens the door. You go from having the bare minimum what you need to like all these additional things you find or complexity you've unveiled. And I think as long as you look at investigation that way, it's cool. Personally, for me, I like a real mix. I like lots of social, but I like really great high energy action scenes as well, but not too many action scenes. And I think the investigation part is, I don't know, I guess my focus isn't there. I hate puzzles in games, loathe D&D style puzzles where you have to step on the floor the right way or answer a riddle that some some grognard in 1979 wrote down. So I'm not a big fan of that stuff. I'll play through it, but you'll never find that kind of stuff in my games. So I would lean definitely towards social and action being the cornerstones of what I'm doing. Bit of investigation, mystery, unveiling, etc. But I do think it's all about what genre you're trying to emulate, what fiction you're trying to tell, that sort of thing. Last thing I would say is I like to try to blend these things together so that it's a big social scene that turns into a combat. It's a combat that leads to solving part of the mystery, sort of thing. Even in terms of making the combat more of a puzzle, which I think is kind of cool. That kind of boss monster that you can't just walk up and whack. You have to have the widget or stab the heart in the heart of the temple while your friends are keeping the demon busy. That kind of stuff where it's just not a straight, beat the hit points out of it and win the combat type of thing, but there's more going on. So I think you can mix and match a little bit. What's your take? Why'd you ask this question?
Yeah, well, it seems like for play-by-post in particular, some things shine, right? Like drama.
That's fair.
Whereas combat and heavy action scenes can really bog down. I'm running a Pathfinder game, and Pathfinder modules, their adventure paths are we're running the Mummy's Mask. It's Egyptian, it's tomb raiding, right? Which means it's dungeon crawling.
Combat heavy, yeah.
So it's all about dungeons. It's all a little bit about puzzles, the D&D style puzzles. Like they're in a room right now where if they touch a certain thing, the room explodes and tries to kill them. And it should be a sure death trap. Like there's no way to survive, except it's a level 1 module, so it's broken. It's broken. It doesn't actually manage to kill them.
Nice.
Anyway, but that kind of game, that combat and action heavy type stuff, is really slow. You don't advance characters very fast at all. And that's where the interesting things are. And so I think the investigation and mystery stuff is where play-by-post could really shine, because you've got a built-in note-taking system. Everything's recorded, right? All of the little clues are there, right? All you got to do is find them again. It's like a meta puzzle. But at the same token, you do seem to have to create linked lists of, okay, here's the clues we found, and here's where the references are, and then you can solve more complex mysteries.
I've seen some people handle that in some pretty cool ways. There was a Delta Green game that Bola Spinach and I, Dirigible, and a couple of others were in, where the GM actually kept a separate thread and listed the clues for us as we discovered them. So it's basically a running tally, like a menu, like you're talking about. And you know what? When you frame it that way, I should think about this in more of a play-by-post frame, since that's what we're talking about. You're right. Action scenes can be problematic, and I do absolutely use less of them in play-by-post games. They're more of a high point or something you kind of strive towards, rather than being salt and peppered all through the game. The way I look at play-by-post for that, the whole thing is this social thing for me. You are interacting this is what I want, at least. All the players and NPCs are interacting with one another, with the NPCs, with the world. So it's more of an interactive sandbox kind of thing. But there will be these big set piece action scenes and whatnot. And underlying it, there might be the mystery and the investigation thing that you're talking about as well. But I guess I don't break it down. Like I never go in, when we talked about the prep a little while ago, I never break it down like how much investigation is going to be in this game type of thing. But, if it's the Delta Green game that we're trying to get off the ground right now, there's going to be some significant investigation in that game, because that's what it's about, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess, as you're going along and you're GMing largely by the seat of your pants, following this like flashlight trail down the tunnel as you've left yourself, at a certain point, you're going to be thinking, everything has been a little bit too much dramatic here. Maybe I need to break the tension with some sudden, action adrenaline, or maybe I need to. They've wandered off the beaten trail. Maybe I need to drop some more clues to get them back into the central mystery they're investigating.
Yeah, and frankly, play-by-post is way easier at doing that than it is live, where you don't have to think on your feet. So let's say they're going down a dead end, or they've taken up the wrong pathway. well, now it's the right pathway, or now it's an alternate pathway. And that can be very hard to do at the table live. At play by post, you can invent new NPCs, you can invent a whole new way of that they're going, right? Last thing on the action side of things, for me, make the action important, make it kind of meaningful. I like to have tension and danger in there. So none of that 4 goblins in this room, 5 goblins in this room, 3 mummies in this room, and you're just slogging, right? And that might work at the table if you bust out the minis and the tabletop maps and everything and play by post. That, some people might love it, but that is really far from an optimal. So, I wouldn't play in a game like that. If the game turned into just doing that and you're just kind of getting little bags of XP everywhere by killing monsters, that's not why I'm playing. So
yeah, it started a Savage Worlds Rifts game in the summertime, and I just love this idea of Rifts. And in this case, it's Atlantis, the lost continent, comes back, and it's now like this alien stronghold that stretches from Bermuda to Africa, right in the middle of the Atlantic.
Yep.
And they get onto Atlantis, and then they end up in this fight. Just demons are there, and they fight. And okay, well, it seems kind of random, but the whole thing sets up like this complex chain of events that leads them directly to the capital city. Like it's the first domino falling down, right? These demons are actually important. They're not just like
right
murderous creatures in the jungle. And
yeah, that's cool. That's what I was talking about before, where you blend them together. The combat encounter produces some results for the investigation or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And certainly, especially in old school play, there's a lot of turn that combat encounter into a social encounter by having a reaction roll or having them just, converse with their opponents. So they don't just automatically fight them. But, that's pretty base level understanding, I think, for GMs. But sometimes people fall into that trap, especially if they're following a module carefully, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And now Kalajel.
Well, as I previously established, I have a lot of problem with finding a good balance. So when I start a new game, I usually leave it up to my players. Honestly, I trust my player to think that once they're gonna get tired of combat, they're gonna head back to the village and they're gonna do a large social section. So I don't really think too much about that.
So you largely are following the player's leads on that.
Yeah, I'm following the flow of the game. But for example, right now with 5 Torches Deep, I'm converting the conversions of a lot of old classic modules of old D&D, and those are basically all dungeon crawls. So they're gonna be heavy on combat and exploration and action, but you always have this base of operation, whether it's Omelette for Temple of Elemental Evil or the Keep for the Keep on the Borderlands and Into the Unknown. So there's always possibilities for players to do some social interaction there, some talking, some dealing, whatever, maybe even intrigues, who knows. And so far, that's more or less what happened with the 5 Torches Deep game I'm running, because you start in the Keep, and right away a bunch of people went their own way, started to BedzoneII's character went to speak with a priest, and then went to the Chapel of Halav in the Keep. Antiproduct's character wanted to sell a lot of his sundries that he had because he was overladen, so he went to various merchants. Somebody else, I think it was Vagrant's character, who went to the guild house to learn about the quest for the captured Almirage. So, sometimes your players are just going to take initiative.
Yeah.
If they get tired of combat, eventually they're going to head back to town, and they're going to take the initiative, and they're going to speak to people in town. So I guess you have to trust your players sometimes. They're going to set their own pace.
Yeah, and it's great to see them develop relationships with the NPCs as well, because like you said, we're going to be coming back to the keep time and time again, and so being able to talk to a familiar face is pretty important and largely ignored in a lot of the early D&D play that I had as a child, certainly.
Yeah, that's kind of strange because those modules are written so that you have all those interesting characters in town to interact with, and usually a lot of the time younger players, they just want to kill orcs, they just want to go into the tomb and roll dice and kill things, and they barely interact with the NPCs. And yeah, I realized that a lot of that was lost on myself as well when I was younger.
Yeah, and I didn't play a lot of modules when I was younger. I bought a lot of modules, never really ran them, didn't really play them very often, and when I did run them, I found out it was harder to use the existing material than create my own from nothing. And that seems counterintuitive, but it seemed like I was constantly trying to figure out what was intended, how that was going to be used later in the module, and in an NPC design. And so there just took a lot of research in order to play an NPC that somebody else had created. But
well, sometimes you can just decide to change things up, If you can't really figure out a certain NPC, just decide, okay, he's going to be like that. That's going to be his goal, his focus, and go away.
And if you've read the whole module once or twice, and whether or not this NPC's behavior and motivations are going to be important later. So.
Yeah, but sometimes even in written module, you're gonna have like the overall plot, and then you're gonna have this NPC that's written there, and the way he's written doesn't make sense. Like, did they read their own material?
And here's WhtKnt.
I try and get a blend of the two.
Yeah. What about
because my wife, like I said, she loves action. All she wants to do is roll dice. But I've got some other players who are very much into the role-playing aspect, so we try and blend the two.
What about investigation and mystery?
I have never been good at doing mysteries.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I don't know if it's a mental block. I've read plenty of mysteries, and I know the mechanics of the mystery and how it works, but I'm just not good at making them.
Yeah. And investigation ones are, like Call of Cthulhu, where it's often you're trying to find enough clues to figure out what's going on, because it's it's unclear because it's all strange and wacky.
Right.
So there isn't necessarily a mystery other than you haven't figured it out yet. But
investigations I do on occasion. I don't do a lot of Call of Cthulhu gaming. I have played and I have run, but I don't do it a lot. Most of my investigation type games are ABC quests. Go here and get this clue, then that leads you to the next clue, and that leads you to the next clue.
Right. Yeah. Now, here's a thought. With play by post, because of the speed of the game, which is, not speedy at all. One of the problems with investigation and mysteries is that if you get a clue, then 9 weeks later, you get a related clue. It's really hard to put those together.
Yes.
Where at the table, maybe that's only an hour and a half apart, right? And so you can kind of expect the players to put A and B together and lead them to C. So maybe there's a more straightforward investigation that you're describing works better for play by post.
Yeah, I think so.
Next up, Lavtodd. Particularly with play-by-post.
With play-by-post, I prefer it when there are fewer rules. Like, I get it, combat happens, but it does slow things down. I'm in a Star Wars game right now where basically the convention is, as soon as you roll, go back and edit and post what your options are for your success combination, and the GM will sort it out later, because we don't have time to be going back and forth 18 times to interpret these dice numbers, right? So certainly, if there are combat and skill checks, you know, they should. I don't like it when it's like the bulk of it.
Yeah.
But even then, like because it's this kind of, for me at least, I find that I always have my games in the back of my head. So when it's just a straight soap opera, I find that very stressful, because there's no end of session. There's no go home for the night. There's no, all right, you don't have to worry about Strahd for a week. Like, and it's just kind of always there, right? So I really like games where people can just kind of like go off in character and do their own thing for a while. But some structure to it. Even an investigation can end up being like, well, I wonder if. It's like, okay, time is still passing. GM needs to give a push and let's go to another thing now. We can't discuss this forever. But certainly more of a role play focus, which is what I prefer at a table anyway. But it's just a lot easier to do dice at a table, because you can continue a conversation and people can see them, and you can handle 3 or 4 at a time. And but yeah, I like playing investigative games more than I like running them. Because due to my laissez-faire planning style, I'm not very good at setting them up. Yeah. But yeah, that's kind of where I land as a very smushy splat on the spectrum.
Yeah, I know some of my most favorite times gaming generally involve a game called Vampire the Masquerade, and it's not a good system. Like it works, it functions, and it's the tone of the system kind of supports the tone of the game, so that's pretty good. But it's not. You don't want to fight anything in World of Darkness, because it's just a mess, right? The system barely works. So, but some of our favorite times playing this game, we'd sit down in the living room and we'll start going through this politicking and drama and whatnot. And then we realize 4 hours have passed and nobody's picked up their dice once. And those are really just powerful sessions.
And I love that as a GM too. Like you pull the pin on your plot grenade, you throw it, and you see what happens. And yeah, the best times are probably for you too, where you throw the plot grenade, you sit back, and then you realize you, as the GM, haven't spoken in an hour. Or I actually get to be an NPC instead of a rules lawyer, because I do like getting into character. So that's always fun.
Yeah, so you've played Pathfinder and D&D online. Do you find with those games there's more of a push to use abilities, like to bring the dice out, because the character focus seems to be so much on attaining abilities and getting to use new things? No?
It kind of depends on the feel of the group. Like if you've got this understanding that if you can role play your way to a reasonable answer to a question, I'm not going to make you roll diplomacy for it. It'll save time, it'll keep it more authentic, and we'll be fine, right? It's been a while since I've done a game like that on play-by-post. I do find myself drifting towards stat lighter games just because it takes so long to handle the dice. I think it can be done, and I think there's still good systems. But it's not for crunchy people. Crunchy games got to be in person.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's one of my notes here, is that play by post is a terrible way to learn a crunchy system.
Oh,
Because you touch these rules set so infrequently. Even in a high-paced game, you're maybe rolling the dice once every day or two, looking up rules and that sort of thing, but it's more likely once every week or two. And so you're always forgetting things. Whereas if you're playing at the table, you can be you're watching the other players work through the same issues. The GM is explaining things. You're accessing the system 15 or 20 times in an evening.
Got all your tabs open.
Yeah.
There are some games where I have to reopen all of my tabs whenever I want to post, and it gets really annoying.
Next up, WarDomo. Mysteries and investigations with your players.
Yeah, I tend to fall farther on the role play, drama, and mystery type stuff, particularly for play by post, because combat can drag play by post down to a grind, really, really, really bad. And maybe that's just the way I run. Maybe I run combat poorly, but and it's also funny to say because I'm like the Exalted guy, and Exalted's all about like high flying combat. I just hit my microphone. So what I don't shy away from combat. I'm not going to add superfluous combat just for funsies. Like if I was running 5th Ed, I'm not running like random monster tables. No way. Because all of that's just taking away from moving the plot forward. And these games take long enough as it is to move along without having to just add extra fluff. So if I'm going to have a combat, I want it to be meaningful. I want it to have story implications and that kind of thing.
Yeah, combat is tricky, like you said. Did you play 7th Sea 2nd edition?
Mm-mm.
No. Can't remember.
I think I own the book. I don't.
It might have been McNeil 5 ran it, and very high action game, all about swashbuckling.
Yeah, like a swashbuckling game, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and so the combat, and I'm running a 7th Sea game right now loosely, and it really kind of sets up every time you want to do an action scene. You set up a risk. Why are the players rolling? They're only rolling dice to avoid some kind of risk, right? Like maybe taking damage because something's on fire or what have you.
Yeah.
And then the GM says, okay, well, you're going to make this roll. You describe your approach. We'll make a roll, but first I'm going to set up some opportunities for you. And so if you get extra successes in your roll, then you can buy these opportunities. So then the players can then craft the scene, the action scene, right, and describe themselves doing something ludicrous or very entertaining.
Yeah.
And that all sounds great, and it probably works really fast at the table. But I think in play by post, it ends up adding a level of a series of interactions between the players and the GMs that
what in person would have been just like a couple of back and forth questions. Yeah, I could see that getting clunky. Yeah, and Chronicles of Darkness 2nd edition, that's New World of Darkness, right? They have a whole thing now. I think they started in 2nd Ed where any combat is going to start with motivations. It's a similar concept. Are you trying to run away? Are you trying to kill this person? Are you trying to just scare them? And what's interesting there is it has consequences for what you can do in the fight too. So if it allows outs from the fight that don't involve just somebody's left standing at the end, which is nice. That also has some shades of like the stunting in Exalted as well. which they've expanded with Essence. Exalted 3rd edition had the stunting, you just get extra dice for doing cool stuff and describing it well, which is really nice for play by post, especially because you have the the space to kind of really describe what you're doing. But they've added a thing in Essence where instead of taking those dice, you can kind of cash them in to then like add something to the scene or change the narrative in some fashion. And a lot of games I'm seeing now have some sort of kind of what do they call it? Kind of like a dramatic twist mechanic where the player can introduce something to the scene that way, which is I think that's a fun way of doing it.
I ran a Feng Shui game back in the.
Never played Feng Shui. I've heard good things about it though.
Yeah, coming soon to a Gamers Plane near you. Anyway, I ran.
It's actually supported. We have Feng Shui's in there.
Yeah. Yeah, Kelith built that dice roller for me, and I ran.
I have never played a game on Gamers Plane that actually has the character sheets.
So the game I ran, I used it was a superheroes game. So I took like superhero based shticks, modified, gave players just a lot of leeway to create whatever they wanted, and use the rules roughly to just support that. But then we were just basically using the Feng Shui narrative or combat system, action system. But then I gave, so as part of the game, characters get a number of fortune dice. So some players that are very powerful get very little fortune to start, whereas other ones like the Everyman Hero, which is basically like Kurt Russell playing Kurt Russell in Big Trouble in Little China. Get
in every movie Kurt Russell's ever been in.
Yeah, Feng Shui is very much, I always thought, of Big Trouble in Little China, the role-playing game. It just, anyway, he gets, that character type gets 10 fortune dice. So instead of fortune dice, I printed off these action cards, and they all had like these dramatic twists on them. And I just, at the beginning of each session, I just handed them out to players and say, okay, so you get 5 of these, you get 7. And some of them would be like new weapon, or they were just random words, almost like adopted or something like that.
Prompts.
Right? Yeah. And so the players could play these cards for regular fortune dice, or they could change the plot, right? They could play that card and then they would say why that card was true in the scene, and we just go with it. And it was wonderful. Like just giving players the tools to shape the scenes, just made things come alive in much more ways than just a GM running things alone.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun. Yeah.
And now, Antiproduct.
You mean which one is my favorite?
Sure. Which would you like to see most of? I think maybe is a good way to start.
I think the only really weak point, at least for me, for play-by-post, is the battle scenes. Obviously, because when you get into, well, you want things to resolve quickly, you want it fast-paced. It's the only part of the game really that you want to go fast. Not because you're bored of it, but because you're eager to see what happens.
Right.
While in investigating, you have time to search, to have a plan laid out or anything. But I'm not too estranged by the battle in play-by-post, really. I'm not playing any battle-heavy games, really. But I'd say I'm content enough. It's not my best, but it's definitely not my worst.
Yeah. Next up, BedzoneII.
So I think one of the earlier points I made was that investigation slash mystery. I think it's really hard to carry out in PvP unless it's a shorter defined game. In other words, it's got to be a bit more intense. Player memory is a thing, right? You can't, well, not that you can't expect, but it's hard for a player to try to have to scroll back 10 pages ago to find that one clue you've written in one of the posts you have in order to remember that that's the secret room, or that's the one that helps you connect that that's the murderer. It's very hard. The alternative to that, of course, is keep writing in reminders. Your fresh posts help to summarize what was going on before. I find that quite helpful in general, not just for investigation mystery type situations, but otherwise that's probably a theme that it's one of the harder things to pull off in PvP. I think there is some balance between the drama and the combat, right? So if all you're doing is going from combat scene to combat scene, okay, so in other words, how you see your game. If you see your game as a series of combats linked by a narrative between the combats, it's a very different feeling from if you see the game as a narrative, right? Interspersed with necessary combats when combat takes place. I clearly prefer the second than the first, but I can imagine how people might see otherwise, because some people would like very much, especially for systems, D&D being one of them, especially for systems for which much of how you define your character is in terms of its combat stats, right? How they fight, what equipment they have. The skills are more combat skills than any other kinds of skills, right? The social skills, while present, are not as useful as some of the other systems, right? With greater social skills type systems. So you have to scratch that combat itch, but otherwise the balance is drama and dialogue pretty much first, right? In order for them to get to the next combat situation, I think. Yeah. So again, same predilection. Figure out the story you want to tell, and then help your players anticipate at which points they're going to have to punch somebody just to get to the next stage.
And now, Falconloft.
Honestly, that's different for every single group I've ever GM'd for. I've never had any two. In fact, even just switching one person out of a group can make it a completely different group and make the balance different. But what I try to do is, regardless of what's happening, whether there's combat or whether there is a mystery or whatever, when the combat is over, or sometimes even in the middle of combat, there needs to be some decompression space, which is a comic term. Sometimes you'll see a comic page and it'll be a fight, but there'll be this one page or this one panel in the page where it shows the action happening from a bystander's point of view. There's not, it just kind of, it's like the scene pauses for a second, or it'll kind of zoom out from the action and show it from a high level. So it seems like everything's slowed down for a minute. And really, I think for me personally, when I'm playing in a game, I enjoy games that give a little bit of time in between things that happen. Don't just jump from one event to the next. If you're in combat and the combat ends, you've got to have a little bit of time for the characters to kind of reflect on what happened in the combat. And that can kind of lead to social scenes in itself, because then the players are talking about what they've learned, or if there was loot that dropped in the battle or whatever, and they found it there, they try to figure out how to use it or what it is or whatever. And a lot of that can generate itself. And then once it seems like everybody's kind of done talking, then jump ahead to the next thing. But that's really as good as I can say on that, because every group that I've GM'd for is different. And if I try to use the balance from one game that I found that works real good, and I move it on to the next game, it doesn't work at all. So.
Yeah. Did you run a gumshoe game at one point? Yeah. I think
I love the system, but that is not a game I can run. I don't know why.
Yeah. It seems like such a perfect solution to investigation and clue-based plots.
Yeah, you know, it did to me too, and for some reason it just doesn't work as well as it should. I think part of that is because there is no unexpected, well, I guess the best way to put it is there's no unexpected twist, because if something is there and you have the skill for it, you discover it. But what happens if you interpret it wrong? Or what happens if you do find the clue, but it looks like something that it's not? Well, that gets harder to do in Gumshoe, because when you find the clue, you have to, or you're supposed to give all of the details of the clue that they find, and it's up to the players to figure out how their character interprets it. So you can't have the players say, for instance, in D&D, if they rolled low on a perception check, you couldn't have the same effect as in, my words are getting backwards. In D&D, if you roll low on a perception check, you can say, well, you see this and this is what you think it means. The players may know that that's wrong because they rolled low, but they don't know what the right answer is.
Yeah.
In Gumshoe, if they see something and they have the skill for it, they know what it is. There is none of that, well, am I actually interpreting this right? Do I really understand it? So it takes a little bit of the mystery out of the mystery. And
yeah,
that's my biggest concern with it, or why I can't run it anyway.
that was pretty great. Thank you to all the people that joined in and chimed in their 2 cents. Apologize for some of the low levels on some of the recordings. I need better editing software so I can adjust one level and not crank up my own volume by and deafen you as well. Anyway, as you saw from the video and from the interviews, I think a lot of people had no real sense of what a balance was. When I asked the question, I was expecting things like, well, 40% combat, 40% dialogue, and 20% intrigue. But nobody really gave me anything that specific, but still some great advice and some things I hadn't thought of. Anyway, so thank you very much for joining me, Kralik, on Gamers Explain. Episode 5 of Season 2. Episode 6 will be up next week as well, with another great question, and that one will be on how to deal with games that just seem to be petering out or running out of steam. So if you've enjoyed these videos, hit like and hit subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you next week. Thank you.